Hello, this is Catherine Dubberly, the Answer Lady. Today I'd like to show you a wonderful new stitch for loom knitters. I think I'm going to call this heart lace. See how you like it.
A friend on one of my knitting groups posted a really gorgeous piece of knitted braid and asked if anybody had any idea how to loom knit it, which I didn't have any more idea than anybody else, but I've been fooling around with it. There was my first try, and it's not bad, but the top of the heart is not quite like the original. And there's my second try, which I think is the right one. The third try, I tried something different and I think is not as good. So let's go through it and see how it goes. The actual pattern takes place over the center 10 stitches. I'm knitting a knit one, purl one edge on each side. So I cast on 14 stitches, but the actual lace is on 10. And I'm going to change colors and use this red heart with love right now. What I was using is called Bamboo and You. I think it's by Coates and Clark. And it's perfectly nice, but I just want to see how this looks in a different yarn. That's my purl stitch. The next 10 stitches for this row are all going to be knitted like that. This is the U stitch. I'm working on a Kiss loom, which I just love because this is the nicest, easiest on the body, most smooth way of making a knit stitch that I know of. See, they're all going to knit over. They're all going to be exactly the same size. You can wrap all 10 at once. It's just delightful. However, if this is not the loom you have, I don't think it's going to make a great deal of difference. This should work on any loom that allows you to do the transfer. So there's my 10 knit stitches that are the part of the pattern. And here is my one purl and one knit at the edge. Now, to begin it, I'm going to find the two center stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and I'm going to cross them. This was not done on the original swatch that I was copying, but this is a look that I like for beginning such things, and I don't see why I can't do it a way that I know it looks good. So that's row 1. You knit across. Whoops, I didn't knit off my loop. And cross the two center stitches. Row 2, we're going to knit the knits and purl the purls, and I will see you when I get to the other end of it. Okay, my row 2 is knitted. I'm going to take the two center stitches again, and this is where the lace begins. Lift the stitch one left of center. In this case, it's stitch number 6. And move stitch number 7 onto needle 6, and replace stitch number 6 on the same needle. Do the same thing on the other side of center. This is where a loom such as this one with the pegs relatively close together for the gauge that I'm getting does make matters a little easier transferring. I don't have to stretch from side to side. So now we have two empty pegs. These are called pins in Kiss, and they're like gate pegs if you're a machine knitter. They space the stitches, but they don't have any part in the stitches. They're just spacers that we work around. So these are my pegs, and 2 are empty. And now I'm going to knit across. I slip the first stitch every row of this just to make a neat edge. My edge does not look like that on the original. If one of you has an inspiration of how to make a nicer braid edge than this, please jump in and we can continue to work on that. But we could also put this as part of a larger piece of fabric, and then we wouldn't be concerned about our edges so much anyway. I'm going to purl this one. Knit this one. The only difference between this and the rows previous to it is that although I knitted the knits and purled the purls, or I purled the purls but I'm knitting the knits now, I also slipped the 2 empty center pegs, meaning didn't do anything except run the yarn behind them. Where there are 2 stitches on a needle, on a peg, I'm lifting both over the new wrap right there, and I did so over here too, and I missed a little bit of it, I see. So that was row 3, I think, because I'm on the right side. Now I'm going to, before we wrap for the next one, repeat what was done on the last row. Lift the stitch to 2 stitches left of center, replace the neighboring stitch on it, on that peg, and replace the original stitch on the peg. On the right, lift the stitch, move the stitch that's nearest the center right out one, replace the original stitch. And now I'm going to go back knitting the knits and purling the purls and slipping the empty pegs in the middle, which is now 4. I'll wrap across and show you. This will be knit, 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 slip 1, 2, 3, 4 behind the pins on a loom without pins, just behind the pegs, knit 4, no, knit 3, sorry, purl, and knit the final stitch. I'll hook these over and see you when we're ready for the next transfer. See the floats forming? These are integral to the design. They look funny now, but they'll look great later. Now, but we've knitted this row, but every row after the first one gets a transfer. So again, we're going to lift stitches and move them over and replace the original stitches. This is a little bit like making a cable, except that with a cable, I would cross this stitch over to this peg. But I don't need to change its place. We want to leave the space open. And the point of changing the places of the 2 stitches so that the one that gets moved ends up in the front of the fabric is to create this line. That makes the illusion of the heart outline. So, time to knit the knits and purl the purls. Here's a shortcut that we can use on Kiss looms. If I just wrap below the original stitch where the knits are wrapped above, I can go across the whole row and knit off everything in its right order as long as I don't get confused. So I'll see you when I've done that. Okay, we have more floats developing. Time to make the last of the transfers. Lift this stitch, move that one away from the center towards the edge, replace the original. Do the same on the other side. Now, I have not tried this with a different number of stitches. I used what I thought the sample had used. And I dropped my stitch, dadgummit. There we go. But I don't see any reason that you couldn't use more or fewer stitches up to a point. The effect will only be achieved within a certain range, but it's something we could play with. So, this row has been transferred. Slip, purl, knit, slip that whole bunch in the middle, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this row, knit, purl, knit. I'm going to talk to you while I knit these so you get to watch how this works. Some people have been extremely flattering about being impressed that I could look at the picture and come up with a way to knit it. And I want you to be not so impressed that you don't try to think that way. This is exactly like learning a language. When they teach you in kindergarten to sing Frère Jacques, you're not a French speaker yet, but you can learn French. And when you learn to follow a knitting pattern, you're a knitter yet, but you're not able to think in knitting language yet. But as you work more and read more of them and experiment, you will begin to start to see what's coming out here as a language expressed in stitches. And most people can eventually learn to do what it is that I'm doing. I've just got a lot of experience in a lot of knitting media. I knit on needles and on a machine and on all kinds of looms, and all of those cross references do help. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 floats. That's what we want. So this row changes. Where's my yarn tail? On this row, we're going to purl, as we have been doing, knit the knit stitches, but we need to cast back on via E-wrap these empty stitches. Empty pegs. And that's a knit, and that's a purl, and that's a knit. Once I have got these knitted off, we do something completely different that makes that butterfly looking shape in the center. Knit and purl. By the way, there's another way to purl on Kiss looms that I like better, but for just one at each end, it's not worth getting out a different tool. Now we need to determine which are our center needles, counting in. The two not covered by fingers are the ones. So I'm going to lift the first float to the left one, the second float to the right one, third to the left, fourth to the right, and final one to the left, just alternating where I hang the floats. Now this row, we will knit the knits and purl the purls, same as we've been doing, but when we get to these center two needles, pegs, I can't talk, the center two pegs have multiple pieces of yarn on them, and we're going to knit all of those off at one time. A normal knit, a purl, these are normal knit stitches. Now all of these loops all need to come over, and they all went over just fine, but if they gave you trouble, you could take them over the top loop one at a time without harm, just so long as they're all knitted this row. And the remainder are normal knit and purl stitches. So that should be our first repeat in gray. I'm going to knit another one so that we can get a good look at it. I'm ready to hang these floats again, and I wanted to tell you a couple more things I thought about while I was working. First of all, by floats I mean these straight strands of yarn that were created when we slipped or did not knit, just moved behind the needles, so that we're clear on that. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, let's start hanging. I have been hanging left, right, left, right. There may be some other refinement that we want to bring to it in a little bit, but that's working. But I wanted to point out that the final float is not very large, and you can mistake it for the back of a stitch. Here it is right here. So make sure you do get 5 floats. And then we're going to knit across. And after we have knitted this row, we're going to not cross. This final row doesn't get any, what am I trying to say? There are no transfers on this row, would be the better way to put it. I have tried it both ways, and I've decided I prefer it this way. To let this final row go across and get knitted and reestablish the fabric, but not make any movements and create any eyelets on this row. So every time we'll start going from left to right, at least that's the rhythm I've been using, and that'll be row 1, and our first cross will occur on that. We'll just let this one get knitted and wrapped in the normal way. My purl tried to get away, but haha. There you go. There's a nice view. I'm quite pleased with how this is turning out. Possibly we may do some other things later, but I'm really liking it. This row does have what I just showed you. A row knitted where no transferring occurred, no crossing, no eyelets. And now when I start to go wrap this way, this row will get those center 2 stitches crossed, and our pattern will begin again. Now I'm going to put the instructions for what I've got here on the Loom Knitting Index page on my website so that you can play around with it. Right now this is a usable design for putting down the center of a scarf or a sweater. Actually, it would look great. Possibly as an accent on a hat. But it isn't a finished piece of anything. I've got an idea about something that I'd like to do with it, joining something in the center of a sweater. You could just knit a nice piece of braid like this and apply it to anything, including putting it over another fabric in a contrasting color. I think that would be very pretty. But this is something you can play with. You can see it's not very difficult, and it makes the most exquisite lace. So thank you to whoever located it and challenged us to figure it out. I think this is something we're all going to enjoy. And I'm ready to cross these center 2 stitches and continue. I would like to tell you something else just before I go. I'm not a big fan of Red Heart, the bargain stuff, but this Red Heart with Love I really do love it. It's much, much better for another $1 or $2 more. I think very worth it. And it did a nicer job, in my opinion, of making this lace and heart design than a more expensive yarn. This is Bamboo and You, and the Red Heart puffed up and made the design, I think, more distinct.